Welcome, Protege. In this tutorial, we're going to explore conditional statements. And these are your for loops, if-else statements, switch statements, and while statements. Computers are all about making decisions. They take in an analog signal from the real world, convert it to a digital signal, and perform some action based on what it received from the sensor or input from the user. A simple example would be a computer taking in temperature data on its CPU. If it sees that the temperature goes above a certain threshold, the computer will enter, say, a low power mode or throttle down the frequency until this temperature reaches a nominal value, and it can continue normal operations. This tutorial is a brief introduction about each conditional statement, and I will go more in depth for each one in later tutorials. First, I'm going to start out by creating a script. If you don't know how to do that, then please go back to tutorial 11 where we cover scripts. And we can begin writing our script. I'm just going to start by typing out some boilerplate code. The first conditional statement we're going to cover is the for loop. And these are great for repetitive actions. Say, for example, we have some data in an array or matrix, and we want to find the max or min value. You would use a for loop to iterate through all the elements. Another example would be if we had a bunch of images from a time lapse. We can iterate through each one and perform some type of processing on each image, such as compression. The syntax for a for loop is as follows. And we have some variable m, which is our counting variable, and the start and end values for our for loop. In this case, m would start at 1, and it would end the operation when it got to s. So under variable matrix declarations, I'm going to declare what s is. Just say that's 10. And now m will iterate from 1 to 10. And if we need to increase this iteration, we can simply go back to our variable declaration and change this to, say, 20. And now m will iterate from 1 to 20. The default increment is 1 in this case, but you can change that to, say, increment by 2. And you just add this argument here, and you separate each number by these colons. Again, in this case, m would start at 1, increment by 2, and end at 20. Now we can start performing some code within this loop. And you always have to add the for loop with end. I'm going to label this section for loop. And notice in this for loop that we start at 1, where in, say, C or C++, we usually start at 0. And the reason for this is because MATLAB starts at 1. And to show you an example, I'm going to go back to the command window, create a random matrix, try to index into the 0th element. And it returns an error saying we need a real positive integer. And if I try to index into element 1, it will return 5. And just to confirm that this is the first element, This is something that you have to be very careful with, and something that people often tend to forget, but you'll eventually start to remember and get the hang of it. The next conditional statement we're going to cover is called if-else. And this will execute a statement if a certain condition is true. Here we have a condition where we check if element 1 of matrix M is equal to 10. And notice that we have two equal signs here, and we have to do that since we want to perform a relational operator. Whereas we use a single equal sign to set a variable or matrix equal to a value. If this element is indeed equal to 10, then we would jump into this statement and perform our code here. And if that's not the case, then we need another statement to perform code in that case. And for that you would use else. If m of 1 is anything but 10, then we would go down to this else block of code and perform what's inside that. For this one, you also have to add end here to terminate your if-else statement. Otherwise, you will get an error. The next conditional statement is a while statement. And this will repeat a block of code if a condition is true. If we go back to our example that we mentioned in the beginning where we're checking temperature data on the CPU, maybe we would have a while statement here where if the temperature is below that certain threshold, then we would perform our normal operations. But as soon as that temperature goes above 100, then we would enter that low power state. And the syntax for the while statement is while, and then you have your expression. Let's just say a less than 100. If a is less than 100, then we would perform code if a less than 100. Again, you have to add end at the end to terminate your while statement. And the last conditional statement that we're going to cover is called the switch statement. For example, say we're taking in some user input, and based on what we receive from the user, we would perform a certain action. Start out by typing switch, and then you would have some variable that you would check, and next you would start defining your different cases of that variable. If our user input is a 0, then we would jump into case 0 and perform some code. If our user input is 1, then we would jump into this block of code. And if our user input is 2, then we would jump into case 2 and perform this block of code. You can have as many case statements as you like. It will only perform the block of code where a certain case is true. For example, if our user input is 1, it will not perform this block of code for case 0. And like every other conditional statement, you have to add end at the end to terminate your switch statement. To do a quick recap, In this tutorial, we introduced the for loop, the if-else statement, the switch statement, and the while statement. The for loop was good when you want to perform some repetitive code. The if-else statement was used to execute a certain block of code if a condition was true. The while statement repeated a block of code if a condition was true. And finally, the switch statement executed a certain piece of code based on this variable. That's it for this tutorial. Please subscribe below or leave a question or comment.